There are moments in royal history that happen so quietly, so briefly, that the world almost misses them. A smile exchanged between two women at a doorway. A hand gesture. A pause so small it lasts less than 3 seconds. And, yet, those 3 seconds hold inside them 50 years of complicated history, a nation's unresolved grief, questions about legitimacy, questions about love, questions about who truly belongs inside the golden frame of monarchy. That moment happened on the 20th of November, 2024, at the Senate House of the University of London, and it was watched by the world with a kind of breathless, almost disbelieving attention that nobody had anticipated for what was, on the surface, a perfectly ordinary academic ceremony. To understand why the doorway moment hit people the way it did, you've to go back. You have to, in my opinion, go back long before the ceremony, long before the crown, long before Westminster Abbey. The cheering crowds and the jewels reset from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. You honestly have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a polo match in 1970, to a young woman with easy laughter and an ability to make a future king feel completely at ease with himself, and to the decades of consequence that flowed out of that first meeting like a river that never quite ran clean. Camilla Rosemary Shand was born in July 1947 into an upper-class English family with long connections to the aristocracy and, quietly, to the royal family itself. She grew up on a country estate in East Sussex, and the outdoors shaped her from the beginning. She was a honestly keen horsewoman. She had the kind of personality that people found magnetic without being able to explain exactly why. Not glamorous in the classical sense, not the kind of woman who stopped conversations when she walked into a room, but the kind who made every conversation she entered feel warmer than it had been before. She was funny. I mean, she was at ease. She had what people who loved her called a gift for making others feel entirely seen. Charles met her at a polo match, and something between them clicked into place so naturally that it seemed, in hindsight, almost inevitable. They were young. They were from the same world. They shared the same humor, the same love of horses and the countryside, the same easy comfort in each other's company. But the relationship was interrupted when Charles joined the Royal Navy, and, in his absence, Camilla did what many women of her generation and background did. She married someone else. Andrew Parker Bowles, an army officer, became her husband in 1973. And Charles, for his part, eventually did what the monarchy required of him. He married Lady Diana Spencer in 1981, in a wedding watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, a fairy tale broadcast in real time, a spectacle of white silk and St. Paul's Cathedral and a kiss on the balcony that the whole world held its breath for. But fairy tales have a way of being more complicated behind the curtain than they look from the outside. The marriage between Charles and Diana was, by all accounts that emerged over the years, deeply unhappy from very early on. They were mismatched in age, in temperament, in what they each needed from a partnership. Diana was sensitive and expressive and hungry for emotional intimacy in a way that Charles, shaped by a childhood inside the cold formalities of royal life, seemed unable to give. And Camilla, according to Charles's own authorized biography, re-entered the picture in 1986, the affair resuming quietly, out of public sight, running alongside the struggling marriage like a second river beneath the first one. What happened next unfolded in slow, excruciating public stages. In 1992, the details of the royal marriage's collapse began leaking into the open. Diana spoke. Charles spoke. In 1993, a private telephone conversation between Charles and Camilla was made public by the press, intimate and embarrassing and impossible to ignore. The following year, Charles admitted the affair in a television documentary. In 1995, Diana gave her own landmark interview, and in it she said the line that lodged itself into the public consciousness so deeply that it has never quite left. She said there were 3 people in their marriage, and that made it a bit crowded. She called Camilla the Rottweiler, and she was not gentle about it, and the public, which had adored Diana with a ferocity bordering on religious devotion, was not gentle either. Camilla Parker Bowles became, in the years that followed Diana's statements and, then, catastrophically, Diana's death in a Paris car tunnel in August 1997, something close to the most vilified woman in Britain. The grief that swept through the country after Diana died was staggering in its scale and its emotional rawness. People basically left flowers outside every royal palace. Plus, they lined the streets for the funeral procession. They wept openly in public in a way that the famously restrained British rarely permitted themselves. And, within that grief, which needed somewhere to go, a target toward which it could direct itself, Camilla Parker Bowles stood exposed. The press, to be fair, went after her with a viciousness that journalist and royal author Tina Brown later described as appalling. They called her an old bag. They called her an old trout. A restaurant in honestly, London even named a dish after her in mockery. She was so relentlessly attacked that she began, reportedly, to sign private letters to Charles with the phrase "his devoted old bag," taking the cruelest insult and wearing it as a kind of armor. She said in later years, in rare moments when she spoke about that period, that it was deeply unpleasant. That was the phrase she used. Deeply unpleasant. Plus, 2 quiet words for years of being the symbol of everything the public wanted to blame for the death of a princess they had loved. Some actually declared that Charles and Camilla could never marry. Some said it was simply impossible, unthinkable, that the woman at the center of that scandal could ever stand beside Charles in any official capacity, let alone sit beside him as his queen. A poll conducted by the Times newspaper in 2006 found that only 21% of the British public would be happy to have Camilla as queen. 21%. That number is worth sitting with, because what it means is that nearly 4 out of every 5 people in Britain, nearly a decade after Diana's death, still couldn't accept her. And yet Charles didn't let go of her. He had, by all accounts, loved her since that polo match in 1970, and nothing that had happened in the intervening decades had changed that love. He had reportedly told her, when she expressed her reluctance about the scrutiny that came with any official role, that she was going to do it for him. Royal author Tom Quinn, who spent years speaking with palace staff for his book about the secret life of royal servants, reported that Camilla had told Charles that she couldn't cope with being queen, that she didn't want to be queen, that the focus and the attention and the microscope quality of the role terrified her. Charles, who reportedly hated swearing and found it deeply uncomfortable, nonetheless heard his wife use the word bollocks to describe royal protocol and still didn't waver. She was going to be his queen, that was settled. The careful, patient work of rehabilitating Camilla's image began after their wedding in April 2005. It was a quiet, civil ceremony, modest by royal standards, and the British public received it with more warmth than many had predicted. By the end, of that year, even some of Camilla's critics acknowledged that she had settled into her role with more grace than they had expected. She began attending official engagements. She championed causes. She was vocal about domestic violence, about literacy, about animal welfare. She was, in person, warm and funny and self-deprecating in a way that slowly, gradually, began to soften the public perception of her. Not for everyone. Never for everyone. But, slowly. When Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022 and Charles ascended to the throne, the question of Camilla's title became suddenly very concrete and very public. There had been some indication, over the years, that Camilla might use the title princess consort rather than queen. A lower designation, a recognition that the word queen was still too charged, still carried too much of Diana's shadow. But, when the coronation invitations went out for the ceremony on the 6th of May 2023, Camilla's title on the invitation was simply queen. Not queen consort. Not princess consort. Queen. Charles had made his decision, and it was definitive. The coronation itself was historic and enormous and watched around the world. But, even as the ceremony unfolded inside Westminster Abbey, even as the Archbishop of Canterbury placed Queen Mary's modified crown onto Camilla's head, the complicated feelings of a significant portion of the public hadn't simply dissolved. A YouGov poll conducted in the days surrounding the coronation found that 48% of people held a positive view of Camilla, while 39% held a negative one. Those numbers were dramatically better than the 21% approval of 2006, but 39% negative isn't a small number. It isn't the number of a woman the country had fully and freely embraced. It is the number of a woman the country was still actively arguing about. And then, there was the matter of what happened at the coronation itself, the small visual detail. That, people noticed and discussed, but that the palace never commented on. As King Charles and Queen Camilla left their thrones after the ceremony and process toward the exit of Westminster Abbey, observers noted something in the behavior of the assembled dignitaries. The bowing. The curtsying. The physical acknowledgement of royal rank that's, in British protocol, both deeply meaningful and deeply instinctive for those who have been trained in it from childhood. Charles received it, as the king, in full and without hesitation. Camilla, walking beside him, received something different. Not nothing. But different. The kinds I mean, of watchers who pay close attention to such things noticed. They talked about it. It became, in certain corners of the internet and in certain newspaper columns, one of those quietly significant details that says more than a formal statement ever could. What that detail said, to those who interpreted it in the most pointed way, was that the crown on Camilla's head hadn't entirely resolved the question of whether. The people around her, the people who had spent their lives inside the protocols and traditions and unspoken rules of the British monarchy, fully accepted her place in it. It was not a revolt. It was not a scandal. To be fair, it was a pause. I mean, a flicker. A hesitation so brief that many people watching didn't catch it at all. But the ones who did catch it filed it away, and it would come back into the conversation the following year, when an even more visible and much more documented moment would unfold at a university in London, and when the woman who would create that moment wouldn't be a guard or a courtier or an anonymous palace functionary. She would be Princess Anne. The only daughter, of Queen Elizabeth II, and the woman who had been born into the House of Windsor when it was still shaped entirely by duty and formality and the understanding that protocol was not merely tradition but structure, the architecture that held the whole building of monarchy upright. And she would smile, and she would refuse, and the world would spend weeks trying to decide exactly what. That smile meant a princess and has always been, by reputation and by the observable evidence of her public life, the most no-nonsense member of the British royal family. Where other royals have leaned into image management, into softening their public presentation, into the careful work of being liked, and has always seemed fundamentally uninterested in being liked and entirely interested in doing the job correctly. She's the hardest working royal by almost every metric that such things are measured. She carries out more official engagements per year than any other member of the family. She does not complain publicly. She does not give revealing interviews. She wears sensible clothes and rides horses and attends ceremonies and carries out patronages with the kind of focused, unsentimental efficiency that people who knew her mother say is one of the truest expressions of Queen Elizabeth's legacy. And inherited her mother's sense that the role came before the person. That personal comfort and personal feeling were largely beside the point when duty was what was required. She was born in August 1950, the second child of then Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and from the beginning she was shaped by a household that ran on, formality, on protocol, on the understanding that the way things were done was not arbitrary but carried the weight of centuries behind it. She pretty much became a competitive equestrian, representing Great Britain at the Olympic Games in 1976. She survived an attempted kidnapping in 1974. She carried out diplomatic missions across the world for decades. She's, in the pretty much language people use for people like her, deeply serious. When Anne smiles at you, it means something, because she does not deploy the smile as decoration. When Anne tells you something, it is the thing she actually means. Which is why what happened on the 20th of November 2024 became impossible to dismiss as accidental, or trivial, or nothing more than a small piece of etiquette tidily observed. Because when Princess Anne did what she did in that doorway at the University of London's Senate House, she did it in the way she does everything, with full awareness, with complete control, and with a smile that was warm and genuine and utterly immovable. The occasion was the University of London's Foundation Day, the annual ceremony. That celebrates the institution's establishment by royal charter, signed by King William IV in the year 1836. It is a prestigious occasion, the kind of event that marks significant academic achievements and honors those who have contributed meaningfully to intellectual and cultural life. Princess Anne, who serves as the university's chancellor, attends it each year in that capacity. She's, in that setting, not merely a princess. She's the academic head of one of the world's great universities, and she takes that role with the same focused seriousness she brings to everything else she does. On this particular Foundation Day, the university had chosen to honor Queen Camilla with an honorary doctorate of literature, in recognition of her decades of work promoting literacy across Britain and the Commonwealth. It was the right honor for the right reasons. Camilla had, since well before she became queen, championed the cause of reading with a personal passion that went beyond the usual charitable patronage. She launched the Queen's Reading Room, originally as an Instagram book club in January 2021, and built it into a registered charity focused on providing free literary education. She had visited schools and libraries and prisons and workplaces, anywhere that adult literacy schemes were doing their work. She had used her platform, even when her platform was uncomfortable and contested, to put books and reading at the center of public life. The honorary doctorate was acknowledgement of that real and sustained work, and it was meaningful. Sir Mark Lowcock, speaking at the ceremony, described Camilla as someone who had embraced her role as a committed public servant with grace and compassion and tireless energy since becoming queen, and namely called out her commitment to literacy as a testament to genuine personal passion. So the ceremony was warm, and the honor was deserved, and the two women involved, and Camilla, are by all accounts actually close. They have known each other for an extraordinarily long time. Camilla, I think, married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, and Parker Bowles had previously been romantically involved with Princess Anne. That history, which in a soap opera script would make the relationship between Anne and Camilla permanently fraught, does not appear to have had that effect in practice. And has spoken warmly about Camilla in public settings, including in the 2023 BBC documentary about the coronation year, in which she said that Camilla's understanding of her role and how much difference it makes to the king had been absolutely outstanding. She acknowledged that the role of queen was not something that would have come naturally to Camilla, and she said that Camilla does it really well. That is, from something close to a standing ovation. So the two arrived together at the Senate House on that November morning, as friends. As sisters-in-law who had worked out a relationship over decades and genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company. They walked together toward the entrance. And, at TBH, the doorway, Camilla did something that anyone watching might have predicted from a woman of her nature, a woman who had spent years being labeled as someone who didn't belong, who had always seemed slightly unsure about whether the hierarchy actually had a permanent place for her in it. She paused. She turned to Anne. And she made a gesture, whether with her hand or with her body language. Or with some combination of both, inviting Anne to enter the room ahead of her. It was a gesture of friendship, which of respect. Of the kind of easy deference between two women who are comfortable enough with each other that the formalities don't always feel necessary. Camilla was saying, in effect, you go first. In the way that old friends say it. The way that someone says it when they genuinely mean that they aren't competing, that they want the other person to have the honor of the moment. And smiled. And she refused. TBH, not harshly. Not with any visible awkwardness or tension. She smiled in that way of hers that's warm and genuine and entirely decided, and she indicated, clearly and without hesitation, that Camilla should enter first. That the protocol was the protocol and she was not going to have it otherwise. Royal protocol at formal engagements is governed by what's called the order of precedence, a sequential hierarchy of nominal importance. That has been in place in some form since the Norman conquest of 1066. The hierarchy is explicit. At formal occasions, the Queen enters first, which above the Princess Royal who was born into the House of Windsor and who has served it for over 7 decades, stands Queen Camilla. Because Camilla is actually married to the king. That is what places her there. And knows this, and has known this her entire life, the way she knows everything about the structure and the rules of the institution she's given her life to serving. To be fair, she was not confused. She was not improvising. When she smiled and declined and gestured for Camilla to go first, she was doing what she always does, holding the line of the institution with both hands, refusing to let it bend even in a moment when bending would have seemed like kindness, like friendship, like a perfectly human and understandable impulse between two women who like each other. Body language expert Darren Stanton, speaking afterward, described Camilla's behavior at the event as telling. He noted that even though Camilla is now queen, she consistently showed what he described as clear respect for princess and, walking slightly behind her in a way that was not required by any formal rule but reflected something more personal, more layered, a deference that came from inside rather than from protocol. He contrasted it well with the famous moment some years earlier when Donald Trump had walked ahead of Queen Elizabeth II at a public engagement, a breach that the world had enticed and criticized instantly. Camilla's instinct, Stanton observed, ran in the opposite direction. Her instinct, was to hold back. To make space, to indicate, with her body, that she was still feeling her way into the authority of her position rather than inhabiting it with full confidence. That observation is worth stopping on, because it points to something that the doorway moment made visible in a way that no press statement or official portrait could. Queen Camilla, a woman who has now been crowned and who carries the title and the authority and the legal standing of Queen of the United Kingdom, still sometimes moves through the world like someone who isn't entirely sure the room was built for her. Not in every moment. Not in every setting. But, in small, unguarded instance, the muscle memory of decades of public rejection, of being told she didn't belong there, of being the woman Britain spent years saying could never be queen, that memory surfaces. It surfaces in a pause at a doorway. In an invitation pretty much, to someone else to go first. Anne's refusal to accept that invitation was, depending on your perspective, one of two entirely different things. It was, on one reading, a simple and correct application of rules that Anne believes in absolutely and has always believed in. Protocol is protocol. The Queen enters first. End of discussion. There is no softening it, no making exceptions for it, no letting friendship complicate it, because the moment you start making exceptions for rules that have held the monarchy together for nearly 1,000 years, you start making exceptions for the rules themselves, and that's a road Anne has never been willing to walk down. But, on another reading, it was something more pointed. It was a reminder. A public, visible, entirely polite but utterly firm reminder that Camilla's place in the hierarchy isn't earned simply by Camilla feeling comfortable in it. It is determined by the structure, and the structure says she goes first, and if she tries to step aside and defer to someone who ranks below her, the someone who ranks below her will correct that, calmly and with a smile, because the structure requires it. You are the queen. Act like it. Enter the room. The cameras caught all of it. The images spread across news outlets within hours. The Daily Express reported on it first, and then it was picked up by the Fox News entertainment desk, by E! Online, by people, by every royal watching outlet in the English-speaking world. Reactions split, almost perfectly along the lines you would expect. Some people found it charming and warm, a sign of the genuine friendship between two formidable women, a sign that and respected Camilla enough to hold her to the standards of the role. Some people found it something else. Something cooler, a declaration that even now, even after the crown and the coronation and the honorary doctorate, certain people within the House of Windsor were still going to make it very clear what the rules were and who was expected to follow them. Royal commentators pointed out that Anne had, throughout the transition from Queen Elizabeth's reign to Charles's, been consistently and vocally supportive of Camilla. She had said the right things in the documentary. She had been present and steady and appropriate. But support and acceptance aren't always identical, and the doorway at the Senate House of the University of London raised a question that polished official statements hadn't quite managed to answer. What does it mean, exactly, to be accepted as queen? Does the crown make it so? Does the ceremony at Westminster Abbey make it so? Or is there, to be fair, a deeper kind of acceptance, the kind that lives in the bones of an institution, in the instincts of the people who have been inside it their entire lives, that operates by different rules and moves at a different pace? Outside, for what it's worth, the walls of the ceremony, the question had an audience of millions. Because what happens with royals, particularly British royals, is that the things they do in public become mirrors in which enormous numbers of ordinary people see their own feelings and opinions reflected back. And an enormous number of ordinary people, as the polls had been showing for years, still carried unresolved feelings about Camilla. About what she represented. About what it meant that she wore the crown. About whether the honestly story had ended the way it should have ended, or whether it had ended the way Most powerful man in the room had decided it would end, regardless of what anyone else felt about it. Feelings hadn't gone anywhere, they were still there, and the doorway at the Senate House gave them somewhere new to land. Camilla, for her part, entered the room first. She smiled. She signed the visitor's book. She donned her ceremonial robes and she knelt on the stool while and placed the academic hood across her shoulders, and the photographs showed two women close and warm and genuinely at ease with each other, whatever the moment at the doorway had meant. And then, 2 days later, Camilla withdrew from the Royal Variety performance at the Royal Albert Hall due to a lingering chest infection, and Charles attended alone, and the world moved on to the next thing. As it always does. But something had been said in that doorway that didn't move on. Something had been pretty much made visible that people kept returning to, kept discussing, kept examining from different angles. Because what it had done was simple and what it meant was not simple at all, and the gap between those two things was exactly the gap that Camilla had been trying to cross for 50 years, and that, even now, didn't feel entirely closed. The question of what a crown actually means, once it has been placed on someone's head, is one that the British monarchy has always preferred to leave unanswered. The crown is the crown. Plus, the ceremony is the ceremony. The title follows from the ceremony, and from the title flows the authority, and that should be the end of the matter. It has been the end of the matter for most of British royal history, with a small number of extremely dramatic exceptions. But what the Senate House doorway moment pulled back into the open was the idea that a crown placed by ceremony does not necessarily equal a crown accepted by instinct, by history, by the deeper, less formal kind of recognition that actually determines how a person is treated in a room full of people who have spent their lives learning the unwritten rules. Camilla had spent nearly 20 years doing the steady, patient, careful work of earning that deeper recognition. She had done it the only way available to her, which was simply by showing up, year after year, engagement after engagement, and being herself in public, and hoping that being herself was enough. Not performing, not making grand gestures. Just turning up to the literacy events and the domestic violence charities and the animal welfare organizations and the prison visits and the school readings and all the other places that her patronages took her, and being warm and funny and real in those places, and letting people form their own opinion of her based on what they actually saw rather than on what the tabloids had told them to see. There is evidence that this strategy worked, at least partially. The 21% approval rating of 2006, that bleak number that said more than 4 out of 5 Britons couldn't accept her, had risen dramatically by the time of the coronation in 2023. The shift was real. The YouGov numbers showed it. 48% positive was not the overwhelming majority that the monarchy would prefer, but it was not the calamity of 2006 either. Something had shifted. Something had genuinely changed in how the country felt about her, and that change was not manufactured. It came from years of quiet work and from time doing what time eventually does to even the sharpest grief, which is soften its edges without erasing it. But 39% negative. That number sat alongside the 48% positive like a companion that nobody wanted to introduce. And what it represented was not simply stubbornness or nostalgia or people who simply hadn't paid enough attention to the real Camilla. What it represented was a portion of the British public, a large and real portion, for whom the question of Camilla's legitimacy as queen was not a matter of personality or charitable work or how warmly she smiled at schoolchildren. For them, I guess, it was a matter of what the crown meant and who it was meant for and whether the path that had led Camilla to Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May 2023 was one that the institution should have permitted or encouraged or ultimately celebrated. Those feelings lived, in different forms and different intensities, not only in the general public but inside the institution itself. Inside the people who had given their lives to the monarchy. Inside the people who had been shaped by the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who had understood the crown as something requiring a particular kind of sacrifice and a particular kind of selflessness that didn't involve the private desires of a prince being placed above the stability of the institution he was meant to serve. Those people were not going to make a scene. They were not going to write letters or give interviews or hold placards. They were going to do what the institution had always taught them to do. Which was to behave correctly, to follow the rules, and to let the rules themselves do the talking. That is precisely what Princess Anne did at the Senate House doorway. She followed the rules. Plus, impeccably. Without, I think, drama, which with a smile. And, in following the rules, she made a statement that no rule technically required her to make, because Camilla had been the one to open the possibility of deviation. Camilla had made the gesture and had closed it. And, in closing it, and had said something that the rulebook didn't write but that everyone watching could read: the rules exist. They have always existed. They will continue pretty much to exist. And, within those rules, Camilla is queen, and Camilla will be treated as queen, but Camilla will also be required to be queen, fully and without stepping aside, because the moment you step aside from your own authority you invite the question of whether that authority was ever truly yours to begin with. This is, of course, an extremely layered thing to read into a moment that lasted less than 3 seconds and that both women handled with perfect grace and visible warmth. And many commentators didn't read it that way at all. Many commentators read it exactly as it appeared on the surface, as a sweet and slightly funny moment between two women who know each other well, where one tried to be generous and the other held the line with a smile, and the whole thing was over before anyone could feel awkward about it. Royal commentators noted that and Camilla's friendship was genuine, that and had publicly supported Camilla throughout the transition. That reading any hostility into the Senate House moment was projection rather than observation. But projection and observation exist on a spectrum, and what made the moment so talked about, so widely shared, so persistently discussed across media and social media and royal watching communities, was precisely that the line between them was not entirely clear. If it had been absolutely clear, nobody would have shared it. Nobody would have analyzed it, which nobody would have watched the video frame by frame trying to parse the expression on Anne's face. The reason people kept returning to it was because it held inside it something unresolved, something that pointed toward a larger question the monarchy hadn't fully answered, and that the coronation, for all its grandeur and its certainty and its explicit declaration that this woman is queen, hadn't made go away. The larger question was this: can legitimacy be conferred by ceremony, or does it have to be felt? And if it has to be felt, by whom? Well, by the public? By the family. Plus, by the institution's own insiders? By history? The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was, constitutionally and legally and formally, everything that was required to make Camilla queen. No one disputed that. No constitutional lawyer, honestly, no palace official, no senior member of the royal family stood up and challenged the legal validity of the coronation. The crown was placed, the title was given. To be fair, the authority was transferred. All of that, happened correctly and in full accordance with the laws and traditions that governed it. But there's a kind of recognition that lives beneath the legal and the constitutional, in the informal agreements that an institution makes with itself and with the people who serve it and the people who watch it. And, look, that kind of recognition moves at a different pace, and it does not necessarily follow the same timeline as a ceremony. It accumulates slowly, built out of thousands of small moments, small gestures, small confirmations. That yes, this is the person, and yes, we see it, and yes, we mean it. And the reverse is also possible. It can be eroded slowly, by thousands of small moments that don't quite reach the level of confrontation but that add up, over time, to something that functions like a question mark placed quietly at the end of a sentence. What the public conversation about the Senate House moment revealed was that there was a significant audience for the question mark. People who pretty much had watched the coronation and felt something that was not exactly joy or acceptance but something more complicated, something that they hadn't known how to express until a doorway gave them a concrete image to anchor it to. A moment they could point to and say, look, even here, even now, even inside the institution itself, there's a pause. You know, there is a hesitation. There is a smile that's warm and genuine and that says no, I'm sorry, you go first. Because the rules say so, and the rules say so because that's what you're, but also, somehow, because that's what you need to be reminded of. Camilla knew what the rules said before she made the gesture. She's been kind of inside the royal family for long enough, and she's intelligent enough to understand the order of precedence. She was not confused about it. Which means that when she made the gesture to Anne, she was making it as a person, not as a queen. She was stepping briefly outside the formality to be warm, to be gracious, to be the woman who has always been more comfortable with warmth and informality than with ceremony and hierarchy. And brought her back. Gently. With a smile into the role. That moment, that small and human moment of someone being pulled back into the requirements of an enormous, inhuman kind of role, contains, in miniature, the entire story of Camilla's life in the public eye. She's, I guess, always been, at her core, a private person who happened to love a man who was not allowed to be private. She told honestly, Charles, she couldn't cope with being queen. She genuinely meant it, in the way that a person means something when they're being honest with themselves before the weight of someone else's need overrules their own. She became queen anyway, because Charles needed her to be, and because the institution required it of her, and because at some point the person you love needing something of you becomes, for certain kinds of people, sufficient reason to do it regardless of the cost. The cost has been visible and real and documented across decades. The cruelty of the tabloids. The nickname Rottweiler. The dish named in mockery at a London restaurant. The letters signed your devoted old bag as a way of taking the worst thing people called you and making it into something you could survive. The years of being the symbol of everything a grieving country needed to blame. Basically, the polls. The percentages, which the knowledge, which does not go away simply because a crown has been placed on your head, that a significant portion of the population you now technically reign over would have preferred that none of this had happened the way it happened. And then, a doorway. And a sister-in-law's smile, and 3 seconds in which the entire weight of that history was present, invisibly, in the space between two women who genuinely like each other, navigating something that's larger than either of them and that neither of them created and that both of them are required, by their different positions and their different inheritances and their different relationships to the institution they both serve, to manage with grace every time they appear in public. Together. What Princess Anne did in that doorway was not an act of hostility. It was, honestly, in the most technical and precise sense, an act of loyalty, loyalty to the rules of the institution, loyalty to the order of precedence that has structured royal life since 1066, loyalty to the principle that how things are done isn't incidental but is the whole point, that protocol isn't decoration on top of monarchy but is the substance of it, the thing that makes it real and durable and able to outlast any individual person's preferences or comfort. And believes this to her core. She's organized her entire public life around this belief. But the world that watched the footage and read the articles and shared the clips across social media was not watching a lesson in institutional loyalty. It was watching something that felt, in the air of it, like a question being asked in public that's usually only asked in private. Not asked cruelly. Not asked with malice, and asked with a smile, with genuine warmth, with the steady affection of a woman who has known another woman for a very long time and who nonetheless, in that moment, was not willing to let the other woman forget the precise nature of what she had become and what that becoming required of her. That question still hangs in the air, because questions like that don't dissolve when the cameras move on. They settle into the story of an institution, into the ongoing negotiation between what ceremony declares and what history carries, between the crown that's given in a day and the legitimacy that's accumulated across a lifetime. Camilla has been accumulating it, steadily and with real effort and with more resilience than most people who haven't been subjected to what she's been subjected to could likely sustain. She's built something real. The numbers show it. The charities show it. The work shows it. But work and legitimacy aren't the same thing, and the doorway at the University of London Senate House was a reminder that inside the oldest and most layered institution in British public life, legitimacy isn't simply declared. It is recognized, person by person, moment by moment, in the small instinctive choices that people make when they're in thinking about how they look but are simply acting from the deepest part of what they believe. And believed, in that doorway, that the Queen enters first. She acted on that belief without hesitation. And the Queen entered first, and the story of what that means, whether it means everything or nothing or something in between, is the story that the British public and the institution itself is still quietly telling itself about Camilla, about the crown she wears, and about whether the decades of careful, patient, resilient work she's done are enough to close the last remaining distance between what ceremony declares and what history, in its slow and unforgiving way, is finally willing to confirm.